"You're ruining my life and the wolves will be happy," said the stepmother. Imagine being only 3 years old and hearing these words coming from someone who should be protecting you. "You're ruining my life and the wolves will be thrilled to find you." These aren't lines from some dark fairy tale, but the harsh reality little Emily faced at the hands of her stepmother Victoria. A story of abandonment, survival, and the true meaning of family that'll tug at your heartstrings and bring tears to your eyes. What would you do if you were abandoned in a dark forest at just 3 years old? How did Emily survive? And most shocking of all, what happened when she decided to get even 10 years later? This is a story that'll make you believe that even in the most desperate situations, life can find a way toward redemption. Before we begin this emotional story, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and I'll be happy to give your comment a little heart. Now let's dive into this moving story. The first rays of sunlight were sneaking through the curtain gaps while little 3-year-old Emily hid under the covers, trying to put off the inevitable encounter with her stepmother Victoria. The Chicago apartment always felt cold, even on the hottest days whenever Victoria was home. "Emily, come eat breakfast now or you'll go hungry all day," Victoria shouted, her harsh voice echoing off the walls of the small apartment. Emily's big, frightened blue eyes peeked over the blanket while her heart raced. With hesitant steps, she climbed out of bed and walked down the hallway, her tiny fingers trailing along the wall as if seeking some kind of protection. "Good morning, Vicky," Emily whispered, using the nickname her father used. "Don't call me that. How many times do I have to repeat myself? It's Victoria to you," her stepmother snapped, her cold eyes fixed on the little girl as she placed a bowl of nearly cold oatmeal on the table. "Your father's traveling again. Business in Boston. It's just the two of us for the next week." Emily's heart clenched with terror. When her father was home, Victoria maintained a facade of forced kindness. But when he traveled, which happened more and more frequently, the mask came off completely. "You know what happens to kids who are too much trouble?" Victoria asked, leaning close to the girl's face. "They end up in the forest, where the wolves are very, very happy to find them." Emily gulped, her little fingers gripping the spoon tightly. "I won't be any trouble. I promise." "You're already trouble just by existing," Victoria replied with an exaggerated sigh. "I never asked to be anybody's stepmother. Your father should have warned me that you were part of the deal." Later that day, Emily found some daisies growing in a crack in the sidewalk in front of the building. Carefully, she picked 3 flowers and held them like treasure as she climbed the stairs. Maybe if she gave Victoria a gift, she would love her just a little bit. "What's this?" Victoria asked when Emily held out the wilted flowers. "It's for you," Emily answered, hope shining in her eyes. "They're pretty flowers, like you." For a moment, something like emotion crossed the stepmother's face, but then her lips tightened into a thin line. "These are dirty weeds. They'll bring bugs into the house." She snatched the flowers from Emily's small hands and threw them straight into the trash. "Go wash your hands before you catch something." Emily swallowed her tears as she walked away, learning another painful lesson. Never show vulnerability around Victoria. It was like giving a predator the exact spot to attack. At night, as Emily curled up under the covers, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her silhouette cut against the hallway light. "You know, Emily, you really complicate my life. Before you, I could have been traveling with your father. I could have had the life I deserved." She paused dramatically. "Sometimes, I think it would be better for everyone if you just disappeared." The stepmother's cruel whisper echoed in the darkness long after she had left, while Emily hugged her only friend, a worn teddy bear her real mother had given her before she died. In the little girl's mind, the wolves in the forest began to take on faces and voices, all resembling Victoria. Months passed, and the situation in the small Chicago apartment only got worse. Victoria's behavior became increasingly unpredictable, swinging between moments of icy indifference and explosions of fury over trivial matters. On a particularly tense morning, Emily was drinking her orange juice at the kitchen table. Her small hands clutched the glass that was too big for her, while Victoria was on the phone, complaining to a friend about how her life had become a nightmare since marrying Emily's father. You can't imagine what it's like. He's always traveling, and I'm stuck with her, as if I were some unpaid babysitter. Victoria's voice overflowed with resentment. Emily, trying to be invisible as she had learned to be, moved very carefully to set the glass on the table. But her little fingers slipped, and the juice spilled, forming an orange puddle that quickly spread across the white tablecloth. The silence that followed was more frightening than any scream. Victoria slowly lowered the phone. "I'll call you back," she said with a calmness that didn't match the dangerous gleam in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Emily exclaimed, already getting up to fetch a cloth, her little legs trembling. "I'll clean it all up, I promise." Victoria walked slowly toward her, each step echoing like a sentence. "You did that on purpose, didn't you? To get attention, to ruin my morning." "No, I swear I..." Victoria's hand hit the table hard, making the empty glass jump. "Always an excuse, always an accident. Do you have any idea how much this tablecloth cost? How much work it takes to clean up the mess you constantly make?" Emily shrank against the wall, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Victoria. It was an accident." "By accident?" Victoria mocked. "Nothing you do is by accident. You're just like your mother, always creating problems for others to fix." That was a new wound. Victoria had never mentioned Emily's mother before. The little girl felt something beyond her usual fear, a spark of childish anger. "My mom was good. My dad said she was an angel." Victoria's face twisted into an expression of pure contempt. Angel? She was weak, choosing to die rather than take care of her own daughter. And now I'm stuck with her legacy. That night, when Emily's father called, Victoria answered in her sweetest voice. "Of course everything's fine, honey. Emily? She's great, just went to bed. Yes, ate all her vegetables. Don't worry about us. Focus on your business." A pause. 2 more weeks? Well, we'll miss you, but we understand. Work is important. After hanging up, Victoria found Emily hiding behind the kitchen door. Her fake smile completely vanished. "You're ruining my life, you know that? I could be traveling with your father, seeing interesting places, having a real life. Instead, I'm trapped in this apartment, taking care of a child who isn't even mine." Days turned into weeks, and Emily developed a set of unwritten rules to survive. Speak as little as possible, take up the least amount of space possible, make herself invisible. She learned to predict Victoria's mood by the sound of her footsteps, by how the front door closed, by the way she put her keys on the table. Emily also learned to hide. The hallway closet became her refuge when Victoria's emotional storms became too intense. Inside, in the dark, among coats and shoes, she hugged her teddy bear and whispered stories her real mother used to tell. Or at least, stories she imagined her mother would tell. One day, she whispered to her bear, "We'll live somewhere where nobody yells, where nobody threatens us with wolves." But each time her father came home, Emily froze. The words she had rehearsed, the stories of yelling, threats, constant fear, died in her throat. Because Victoria transformed into another person when he was around. She smiled, made Emily's favorite meal, called her sweetie and princess, and so the little girl learned her cruelest lesson. Adults could wear perfect masks, and those who should protect her wouldn't always believe the truth behind them. The day started differently than others. Victoria entered Emily's room before the sun even rose, abruptly turning on the light. "Get up. We're going on a special trip today." Emily rubbed her sleepy eyes, confused by the sudden change in behavior. Victoria never took her on trips. Never did anything special for her. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, a mixture of distrust and childish hope coloring her voice. "It's a surprise," Victoria replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Get dressed quickly. We don't have all day." With trembling fingers, Emily put on jean overalls and her favorite butterfly print t-shirt. Maybe, she thought with the optimism that only children can maintain even in the worst circumstances, Victoria had finally started to like her. Maybe this was the beginning of a new phase. "Can I bring my bear?" Emily asked, holding her worn teddy against her chest. Victoria paused at the door, seeming to consider. "Yes, bring him. He'll love our adventure too." In the car, Emily realized she hadn't eaten breakfast, but was afraid to mention it. Instead, she watched out the window as the familiar Chicago buildings were left behind, giving way to emptier roads and increasingly numerous trees. "Are we going very far?" She finally gathered the courage to ask, after almost an hour of silence. "Don't worry about that," Victoria answered, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "You always wanted to see a real forest, right? Not those pathetic little city parks." Emily didn't remember expressing such a wish, but nodded anyway. The mention of the word forest made her stomach tighten. Finally, Victoria turned onto a dirt road, driving a few more miles before stopping abruptly. Around them, nothing but tall, dense trees, their robust trunks forming an intimidating barrier. "We're here," Victoria announced, turning off the engine. "Our special adventure." They got out of the car. The air was fresh and full of forest sounds. The rustling of leaves, distant bird song, the occasional snapping of branches. Under any other circumstances, it could have been a beautiful place. "Victoria, this place scares me," Emily admitted, holding her bear tighter. Her stepmother turned to her, and in that moment, all pretense of normality disappeared from her face. "This is where children like you belong, Emily, away from people who have real lives to live." Panic began to grow in Emily's chest. "I don't understand. I want to go home." "Home?" Victoria laughed, a dry sound without humor. "That apartment was never your home. I never wanted you there. Your father is never there. And now," she paused dramatically, "he'll never come back. What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "Your father had an accident last week. He's dead, Emily. And you know what that means? It means there's no more reason for me to pretend I want a child around." Emily's world collapsed with those words. Her father, the only person who, even absent, represented safety, was dead? It couldn't be true. It had to be just another of Victoria's cruelties. "You're lying!" Emily shouted, tears finally overflowing. "I want to talk to my dad. I want to go home." "This is your home now," Victoria responded, gesturing to the forest around them. "You always wanted freedom, didn't you? Always complaining about my rules. Well, here there are no rules, just survival." She began backing toward the car. "Consider this a favor. I'm giving you the chance to start over, away from me. Isn't that what we both always wanted?" Emily ran toward her, but Victoria was faster. In seconds, she was inside the car, locking the doors. Emily banged on the windows, screaming and begging. "Please don't leave me here. I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't be any trouble." Through the glass, Victoria stared at her one last time. "You're ruining my life, Emily. And now, the wolves will be happy." The car engine started, and Victoria maneuvered away, leaving Emily alone in the clearing, her small body trembling with fear and despair, hugging her teddy bear as if it were her only anchor in the world. "Daddy," she whispered between sobs, as the sound of the car faded in the distance. "Please come get me." But nothing answered beyond the wind whispering through the trees. indifferent to the broken heart of a 3-year-old, abandoned in a world too big for her to understand. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, when Walter Peterson, an elderly man who lived near the forest, was walking with his old dog, Ranger. Walter was 78 years old and had lived alone since his wife passed away, finding comfort only in the company of his faithful canine companion and in their daily walks together. It was Ranger who first noticed something wrong. The dog stopped abruptly, his ears perked up in alert, and then darted into the forest, ignoring Walter's calls. "Ranger! Come back here, you stubborn dog." Walter sighed, adjusting his worn cap before following the animal. His knees protested as he moved between the trees, guided by Ranger's increasingly insistent barking. What he found almost made his old heart stop. There, huddled against the trunk of an enormous tree, was a child. A small girl, hugging a teddy bear, her eyes red from crying, her face dirty with tears and soil. And Ranger, that old dog normally so wary of strangers, was lying beside her, his large body offering warmth and comfort, while gently licking the little one's hand. "Good Lord," Walter muttered, approaching carefully so as not to frighten her even more. "Hello, little one. I see you've already met Ranger." Emily looked up, clutching her bear tighter. "Is your dog friends with the wolves?" she asked in a trembling voice. Walter frowned, confused. "Wolves? No, dear. Ranger isn't friends with wolves. He's my friend, and it seems he wants to be your friend too." The girl seemed to consider this for a moment. "Victoria said the wolves would be happy to find me." A wave of understanding and fury passed through old Walter. He knelt down, ignoring the pain in his joints, to be at eye level with the child. "There are no wolves around here, sweetie. And even if there were, Ranger and I wouldn't let them get near you. May I ask your name?" "Emily," she answered, her small hand now buried in Ranger's soft fur, who kept his head in her lap, like a guardian. "It's nice to meet you, Emily. My name is Walter. Could you tell me how you got here?" In broken phrases and with the confused simplicity of a 3-year-old, Emily told him about Victoria, about the car, about being left in the forest. Walter felt a lump in his throat. In his almost 80 years of life, he had witnessed many human cruelties, but abandoning such a small child to die, that was something his heart couldn't comprehend. "Emily, honey, it's getting dark and it'll be cold. Would you like to come with me and Ranger? We can find a warm, safe place for you." Emily hesitated, years of learned distrust fighting against her desperate need for comfort. It was Ranger who decided for her, gently tugging at the sleeve of her overalls, as if inviting her to follow them. Walter knew people, good people, who could help a child like Emily. A few miles away lived an Amish community that maintained their ancient traditions away from the complications of the modern world. They were simple, hard-working, and above all, compassionate people. With Emily in his arms and Ranger trotting beside them, Walter walked through the now darkened forest, using his flashlight to illuminate the path. The little one fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from trauma and fear. When they finally reached the King property, one of the most respected Amish families in the community, yellowish lights shone through the windows of the wooden house. John King, a tall man with a long dark beard, opened the door before Walter even knocked. "Walter, what brings you here so late?" John asked, his eyes quickly noticing the small bundle in the elderly man's arms. "I found this child abandoned in the forest, John. She needs help, the kind of help that your community knows how to give, better than anyone." Sarah King, John's wife, appeared beside her husband. Her gentle face, framed by the traditional white bonnet, softened at the sight of Emily. "Bring her in, quickly," she said, already preparing a place by the fire. The poor child is freezing. Inside the simple but cozy house, lit only by oil lamps, Emily woke up, Her wide eyes took in the unfamiliar environment, the polished wooden furniture, the smell of freshly baked bread, the gentle faces around her. No television, none of the constant noises of the city, none of the tension that hung in Victoria's apartment. "Where am I?" she asked, confused. Sarah approached, offering a mug of warm milk with honey. "You're safe, little one. This is our home, and you're very welcome here." Walter explained to the King family everything he knew, and together they decided that, before any contact with the authorities, Emily needed time to feel safe, to regain the trust that had been so brutally destroyed. "Can I stay with you until my dad comes back?" Emily asked, still not fully understanding that her father would never come for her. Or perhaps in her childish wisdom, simply refusing to believe Victoria's cruel words. John and Sarah exchanged glances. "Yes, Emily," John answered gently. "You can stay with us as long as you need." In the days that followed, Emily began to adapt to the different rhythm of Amish life. She would wake up at sunrise, when the whole family gathered for a simple meal, before starting the day's work. No electricity, no cars, none of the constant noise that had marked her short life. Sarah showed Emily how to tend the garden, teaching her to recognize when vegetables were ready for harvest. John took her to the barn, where she watched, fascinated, as he milked the cows in the early morning hours. The King children, 7-year-old Hannah and 5-year-old Eli, quickly adopted Emily as their little sister, including her in their games and chores. It was Hannah who taught Emily how to feed the chickens without scaring them, and Eli who showed her the best places to find wild raspberries at the edge of the property. In the evenings, as the family gathered around the table for their meal, Emily watched, amazed, as everyone joined hands to thank God for the food. Nobody yelled. Nobody made her feel like a burden. When she knocked over a glass of milk, instead of anger, she found only gentle hands helping to clean up and soft voices assuring her that accidents happen to everyone. One night, as Sarah brushed Emily's hair before putting her to bed, the little girl asked the question she'd been keeping inside. "The wolves won't find me here, will they?" Sarah paused, the brush suspended in midair. "There are no wolves that can harm you here, Emily. Not while you're with us. Victoria said they would be happy to find me." Sarah took a deep breath, controlling the anger she felt toward this woman she'd never met. "Emily, sometimes people say cruel things when they have darkness in their hearts. But that doesn't make those things true. The only real wolves are those that live in the forest, and they're more afraid of us than we are of them." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom in Sarah's simple words. "I think Victoria had more darkness in her heart than light." "And that, my dear," Sarah replied, kissing the top of Emily's head, "is the most important lesson you could learn. Recognizing darkness in others, not to fear it, but to appreciate the light even more when you find it." Walter, true to his word, visited regularly, always bringing Ranger, who had become something of a hero to Emily. Time passed, and with it, wounds began to heal. The girl who had arrived broken and frightened began to flourish in the simplicity and unconditional love she had found in her new home. The summer sun shone brightly over the field of ripe wheat, where a 13-year-old girl worked skillfully, her hands moving in the rhythm learned through years of practice. Emily was no longer that frightened child. She had grown strong and determined, her blonde hair now firmly braided under a straw hat that protected her from the intense heat. "Emily, you have visitors coming!" Hannah shouted from the edge of the field. Now 17, Hannah was almost a woman, and like the older sister Emily never had, she had taken on the role of protecting the younger one. Emily raised her head, wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Traders?" she asked, her eyes shining with anticipation. Twice a year, traveling merchants passed through the Amish community, bringing goods and news from the outside world. For children raised in the simplicity of Amish life, it was an event that mixed fascination with a touch of the forbidden. Hannah nodded, a knowing smile on her lips. Dad said we can take a look after we finish here. Emily's hands worked even faster, her heart beating with the possibility she had been nurturing for years. Every time the merchants visited, she asked the same questions, sought the same information. About Chicago, about people named Victoria, about what had happened to certain abandoned children whose parents had supposedly died. Over the years, Emily had discovered the truth through carefully collected fragments. Her father hadn't died in any accident. Victoria had lied. According to merchants who regularly visited Chicago, there had been news of a desperate man searching for his missing daughter, a daughter the stepmother claimed had been kidnapped during a trip to the park. The discovery that her father possibly still lived and was looking for her awakened in Emily something that her Amish upbringing had tried to suppress, a deep and burning desire for revenge. The community preached forgiveness above all, but how could she forgive someone who had destroyed her family, stolen her childhood, and lied so cruelly? That afternoon, while the other young people examined colorful fabrics and rare candies, Emily looked for something specific among the merchants' goods. Her eyes carefully examined the cages where one of the vendors kept exotic animals, mainly to attract children's attention, but also to sell as curiosities, or in the case of some reptiles, as natural pest control. Looking for something special. "Girl?" asked the merchant, a middle-aged man with sun-tanned skin and shrewd eyes. Emily hesitated for just a moment. "That one," she said, pointing to a small glass box where a snake rested, its scales shimmering with a hypnotic diamond pattern. "You've got good taste," the man remarked, lifting the box so she could see better. "It's a young rattlesnake, great for keeping rats away from the barn, but you need to be careful. Its venom can kill a grown man in hours if untreated." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Not from fear, but satisfaction. "How much is it?" The man studied her for a moment, clearly surprised by a young Amish girl's interest in something so dangerous. $20. "But I'm not sure your parents would approve." "They're not my real parents," Emily replied, the words coming out before she could stop them. "And I need it for the rats in the barn." After some haggling, Emily exchanged the coins she had saved over years, doing extra work for neighbors in the community, for the small glass box and detailed instructions on how to handle it safely. That night, hidden in the small room she shared with Hannah, Emily contemplated the snake she now kept in a wooden box under her bed. The rattlesnake slept coiled up, seemingly harmless, but Emily knew of the lethality hidden in those shimmering scales. "Victoria," she whispered to the shadows, "you left a defenseless girl to the wolves, but I'm not that frightened child anymore." Emily spent the following days pretending normalcy, helping with household chores, working in the field, smiling during family meals. But inside, a plan was taking shape, a plan nurtured by 10 years of repressed pain, of nights spent awake remembering the abandonment, of unanswered questions about the father who might still be looking for her. In her diary, hidden between the mattress and the bed frame, Emily outlined her plan in meticulous detail. Wait for the merchant's next trip to the city hide in one of the wagons. Find Victoria's address. Release the snake in her room while she slept. Disappear again before anyone found out. "It's not murder," she justified to herself as she wrote by candlelight. "It's justice. It's what she deserves for trying to kill me." The opportunity came faster than expected. Just a week later, the same group of merchants announced they would leave for the big city the next morning. Emily prepared a small bundle with some clothes, a little food, and of course, the box with the rattlesnake. That night, when everyone was asleep, Emily wrote a brief letter to Sarah and John. "You saved me when I needed it most. For that, I ask forgiveness for what I'm about to do. There's something I need to resolve from my past. I promise to return when it's finished. With love, Emily." In the early dawn, while the community still slept, Emily slipped out of the house, with her bundle and the carefully wrapped snake box. The merchant's camp was about a mile away, and she knew the path even in darkness. With her heart pounding, Emily hid under the canvas of one of the wagons, settling between boxes of merchandise. The snake, disturbed by the movement, stirred in its box, emitting a soft rattling sound that made Emily freeze in fear of being discovered. "Shh," she whispered. "Soon, we'll both get what we want." When the first rays of sun began to light the horizon, Emily heard voices and movement around the wagon. The merchants were preparing to leave. No one checked under the canvas, and soon the wagon began to move, taking her away from the only happy life she had known, toward a past she had never completely buried. The journey was long and uncomfortable. Emily remained hidden throughout the day, coming out only briefly when the caravan stopped to rest. Pretending to be just one of the many children traveling with the group, the snake became increasingly agitated, as if sensing the purpose for which it had been acquired. On the second night of travel, when everyone was sleeping around the campfires, Emily decided to check on her living weapon. She carefully opened the box, using a branch to keep a safe distance. The rattlesnake raised its head, its forked tongue testing the air, its eyes fixed on her with a cold intelligence that made her shudder. It was in this moment of distraction that the lid slipped from her fingers, falling with a thud that startled the snake. In a movement too quick for Emily to react, the rattlesnake struck, its fangs sinking into her exposed wrist. The pain was instant and overwhelming, like liquid fire running through her veins. Emily stifled a scream, aware that she couldn't draw attention. With her heart racing in panic, she managed to push the snake back into the box with the branch and closed the lid, but the damage was already done. Her arm began to swell rapidly, the skin around the fang marks becoming red and hot. Emily knew from stories she had heard that without treatment, the venom could be fatal. "Help," she tried to call, but her voice came out weak, almost inaudible. The world began to spin around her, the stars in the sky merging into blurred lines of light. "Please, someone." Her legs gave way, and Emily fell to the forest floor. Her last conscious thoughts weren't about Victoria or revenge, but about John and Sarah, Hannah and Eli, the family that had taken her in without asking for anything in return, the family that had taught her about unconditional love and forgiveness. "Forgive me," she whispered to the darkness advancing over her vision. "I didn't understand. Until now." And then, Emily plunged into unconsciousness as the venom continued its merciless work in her young body, a cruel irony for someone who had survived abandonment, only to be defeated by her own desire for revenge. Fragments of consciousness came and went, like waves on a beach. Sometimes, Emily heard distant voices. Other times, she felt gentle hands, touching her feverish forehead. Most of the time, however, she was trapped in a world of vivid dreams and disturbing hallucinations. In her delirium, Emily saw herself again at 3 years old, abandoned in the forest. But this time, it wasn't wolves threatening her. It was a giant snake with Victoria's face hissing, "You're turning into me, Emily. You also have poison in your heart now." Other times, she dreamed of Sarah and John, their sad faces saying, "We tried to teach you the path of light, but you chose darkness." And in her most lucid moments, Emily felt an undeniable truth growing inside her. The revenge she had planned wouldn't have brought peace. It would only have transformed her into the kind of person she most feared becoming. "She's waking up," said an unfamiliar male voice. "Emily, can you hear me?" With tremendous effort, Emily opened her eyes. She was lying in an unfamiliar bed, in a simple but comfortable room. A man of about 40, with brown hair sprinkled with gray and kind eyes, sat beside her. Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "My name is Mark Wilson. I'm a farmer. I found you unconscious by the side of the road, with a snake bite on your arm. You were very lucky. I managed to get you to the hospital in time." Emily tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her to lie back down. "How long have I?" "Almost a week," Mark replied. 3 days in the hospital and 4 more here at my farm, recovering. The doctor said it was a close call. If the antivenom had been delayed a few more hours. The reality of the situation hit Emily with full force. She had nearly died. The snake she had bought to kill Victoria had almost killed her. There was something deeply symbolic in this that her teenage mind struggled to comprehend. "The merchants?" she asked. "They continued their journey. They left a message saying they would send word to your Amish family. A girl named Hannah, I believe." Emily closed her eyes, tears streaming down her temples. Hannah would be so worried. John and Sarah probably thought she had abandoned them after everything they had done for her. The shame was almost as painful as the venom had been. During the days that followed, while regaining her strength at Mark's farm, Emily began to reflect deeply on the choices she had made and the path she had almost taken. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of Mark's house, watching the sun set over the cornfields, she finally found the courage to tell her story, all of it. About Victoria, the abandonment, the years with the Amish, and her frustrated plan for revenge. Mark listened, in silence, with no judgment in his eyes. When she finished, he remained quiet for several minutes, as if carefully weighing his words. "You know, Emily," he finally said, "I lost my wife to cancer 7 years ago. For a long time I felt angry. At God, at the doctors, at the world. I thought that anger gave me strength, that it kept me connected to her somehow. But the truth is that anger is like that snake that bit you. The venom hurts the person carrying it more than anyone else." Emily looked at her hands, her wrists still marked by the scars from the bite. "The Amish always taught me about forgiveness, but I never really understood. How can I forgive someone who tried to kill me?" "Forgiveness isn't for Victoria," Mark replied gently. "It's for yourself. It's letting go of the weight you've been carrying, not because she deserves it, but because you deserve peace." Something in those words penetrated deeply into Emily. For 10 years, she had defined her existence in relation to Victoria, first as a victim, then as a potential avenger. And in that process, she had allowed her stepmother to continue controlling her life, even from a distance. "But that doesn't mean she should go unpunished," Mark continued. "There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is personal, destructive. Justice is about restoring order, protecting others who could be hurt." "Justice," Emily repeated, the word seeming new and strange in her mouth. "How can I seek justice without becoming someone like her?" Mark smiled, a gentle smile that reminded Emily of the way John King looked at her. "By seeking truth, not out of hatred, but for healing, not to destroy, but to rebuild." That night, alone in her room at Mark's house, Emily took the diary from her bundle. She reread the meticulous plans she had drawn up for Victoria's death and felt a shiver run down her spine. Those weren't the thoughts of the person she wanted to be. With determined hands, Emily tore out the pages, one by one. Each torn sheet was like releasing a weight she had carried for too long. When she finished, she had a small pile of paper in her lap. Fragments of a hatred she now recognized as a self-imposed prison. "I won't be like you," she whispered to Victoria's memory. "I won't let what you did determine who I become." The next morning, Emily found Mark in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "I've made a decision," she announced, a new determination in her voice. "I want to find my father, and I want Victoria to face the consequences of what she did. Not for revenge, but for justice." Mark studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's do this the right way. With the law, not with snakes." "Do you think it's possible? After so much time?" Walter, the man who found you in the forest. You said he witnessed the abandonment, right? And there are hospital records from when you were treated as an abandoned child. There are paths to truth, Emily. Paths that don't poison those who walk them. For the first time in years, Emily felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the false hope fed by fantasies of revenge, but something more genuine. The possibility of healing, of a circle that could finally close. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes, "for saving my life. And maybe my soul too." Mark placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Emily. You survived abandonment as a child. You survived venom as a teenager. But now it's time to do more than survive. It's time to really live." The words penetrated deeply into Emily's heart. For so long, she had existed in limbo between the trauma of the past and the dream of future revenge, never truly present. The snakebite, paradoxically, had been the wake-up call she needed. That afternoon, Emily wrote a new letter to the king, family. This time, instead of an enigmatic farewell, she told them the truth. About the snake, her frustrated plan, and the new understanding she had found after nearly losing her life. She explained her desire to find her biological father and seek legal justice for what Victoria had done. "You taught me about forgiveness," she wrote, "and I finally understand. It's not forgetting the wrong that was done, but refusing to let it determine who I become. I'll come back to visit you when this journey ends, regardless of the outcome. You will always be my true family." In the weeks that followed, while continuing to recover at Mark's farm, Emily felt an internal transformation as profound as the physical one. The nightmares with wolves and snakes began to diminish. The constant weight of hatred she carried in her chest grew lighter each day. One night, sitting with Mark on the porch, watching the stars, Emily expressed a thought that surprised her. "I think, in a way, I should thank that snake." Mark raised his eyebrows, surprised. "How so?" "If it hadn't bitten me, I might have done something terrible. Something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Something I could never take back." She looked at the scars on her wrist. "These marks are a reminder that I chose to be different from Victoria, that I chose light, not darkness." "That's profound wisdom for someone so young," Mark commented. Emily smiled sadly. "I guess I grew up in the hardest way possible." As days turned into weeks, the relationship between Emily and Mark also deepened. He told her about his late wife, Diane, and how they never had children, one of the greatest regrets of their lives. Emily shared more about her years with the Amish, the lessons she had learned, the skills she had developed. It was as if fate had brought two wounded souls to heal each other. A lonely man still suffering from the loss of his wife, and a teenage girl abandoned twice, first by Victoria, then almost by herself, when she nearly succumbed to the venom of revenge. Mark Wilson's farm was about 60 miles from the Amish community where Emily had grown up, and approximately 120 miles from Chicago. It was a place in between, neither completely isolated, like the Amish community, nor overwhelmingly urban like the big city where Emily was born. 3 months had passed since the snake incident. Summer gave way to fall, coloring the cornfields with golden and reddish hues. The scars on Emily's wrist had faded to a pale pink, but she knew they would never completely disappear. A permanent reminder of the path she had almost taken. "I think it's time," Mark said one morning, as they ate breakfast in the cozy farm kitchen. The aroma of pancakes and bacon filled the air. Emily looked up from her plate. "Time for what?" "To take the next steps. I spoke with a lawyer in Chicago. He said that with Walter's testimony and the Amish records, we have a solid case against Victoria. And maybe we can find your father." Emily's heart raced. Part of her had grown accustomed to the quiet life on the farm, helping Mark with daily chores, learning to drive the tractor, tending the garden using techniques Sarah King had taught her. It was easy to leave the past behind when each day brought new discoveries and moments of peace. But the mention of her father, that almost mythical figure in her childhood memories, rekindled a flame that had never completely gone out. "You really think he might be alive? That he's still looking for me?" Mark hesitated, clearly concerned about feeding false hopes. "Emily, we can't be sure. But the merchants mentioned a man looking for his missing daughter, with a description that matches yours. It's worth investigating." Emily took a deep breath. "And what if he's moved on? Started a new family? Doesn't want me anymore?" It was a vulnerability she rarely showed. The deep fear of rejection that accompanies any abandoned child, no matter how accidental or involuntary that abandonment may have been. Mark moved closer, placing a comforting hand over hers. "Emily, you've grown into an extraordinary young woman. Strong, compassionate, resilient. Any father would be proud to call you his daughter. But regardless of what we discover, know that you'll always have a home here." Those words warmed Emily inside. In recent months, Mark had become more than a benefactor or friend. He had become the father figure she had never really had, even before the abandonment. Her biological father had always been busy, always traveling. Mark, on the other hand, was present every day, teaching her with patience, listening to her attentively, treating her not as a lost child, but as a person of value. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "for everything." Mark smiled, a special gleam in his eyes. "You know, Emily, in these months, you've brought life back to this old farm, and to this old farmer too." A week later, they made the trip to Chicago. Emily watched out the car window, fascinated, as fields gave way to suburbs, and finally to the skyscrapers of downtown. It was like entering an alien world, noisy, busy, overwhelming. "It's so big," she whispered, feeling tiny before the urban immensity. "Different from the Amish community, isn't it?" Mark commented with an understanding smile. "And from your farm too," Emily added. "I can't imagine how I lived here when I was little." They stayed at a small hotel downtown, and the next morning, they met with the lawyer, a middle-aged man, named Robert Simmons, with an office on the 20th floor of a commercial building. "So you're the famous Emily," said Simmons, extending his hand to greet her. "Mark told me your story. I must say, it's quite extraordinary." "Did you find any information about my father?" Emily asked, getting straight to the point. Simmons exchanged a look with Mark before answering. "Yes and no. I found records of a David Campbell who reported his daughter Emily missing 10 years ago. The description matches, and the timeline too. But what?" Emily pressed, her heart beating hard. "He stopped searching after 2 years. According to police records, he moved away from Chicago. We don't have a current address." The news hit Emily like a physical blow. Had her father given up on her? Moved on? Mark put a protective arm around her shoulders. "That doesn't mean he stopped caring, Emily. Sometimes people need to move forward to survive the pain." Emily nodded mechanically, though a lump formed in her throat. "What about Victoria? Were you able to find her?" Simmons' face brightened slightly. "That was easier. Victoria Campbell, formerly Victoria Reeves, still lives in Chicago. She remarried 2 years ago to a finance executive. No children. She was never arrested? Never answered for what she did to me? Apparently she convinced everyone that you had been kidnapped. Even your father believed that version, at least initially." Emily felt a wave of nausea. Victoria had not only abandoned her to die, but had also constructed an elaborate lie to protect herself, possibly destroying Emily's relationship with her father in the process. "What do we do now?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "We have some options," Simmons explained. We can file criminal charges against Victoria for abandonment. With Walter's testimony and the records from the Amish community that took you in, we have a strong case. We can also try to locate your father if you want." Emily looked at Mark, seeking guidance. "It's your decision, Emily," he said gently. "Whatever you choose, I'll be by your side." That night in her hotel room, Emily stayed up late, contemplating her options. The revenge she once desired had transformed into a desire for justice, not just for herself, but for that 3-year-old child abandoned in the forest, for all children who suffered abuse silently. When the sun rose, bathing the room in golden light, Emily had made her decision. "I want to do both," she announced during breakfast with Mark. "I want Victoria to answer for what she did, and I want to find my father, even if he's moved on, even if he doesn't want to see me. I need to know the truth." Mark smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "Then that's what we'll do." The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Emily gave a formal statement to the police, describing in painful detail the psychological abuse she had suffered at Victoria's hands and the final abandonment in the forest. Walter, now almost 90 but still lucid, was brought in to corroborate her testimony. The news of a teenager who had survived being abandoned in the forest 10 years earlier quickly attracted local media attention. Reporters began showing up at the hotel, eager to interview the Amish girl who had emerged from the past to seek justice. "You don't have to talk to them if you don't want to," Mark assured her, shielding her from camera flashes as they got into the car. "It's okay," Emily replied, surprising him. "If my story can help other children, it's worth telling." Emily's quiet determination impressed everyone. Lawyers, police officers, even the journalists who expected to find a traumatized victim. Not a balanced young woman with wisdom beyond her years. And then, a week after arriving in Chicago, came the news that would change everything. "We found your father," Simmons announced, hurrying into the cafe where Emily and Mark were having lunch. "David Campbell. He lives in Seattle now. He's a university professor." Emily felt the world stop for a moment. Does he know about me? That I'm alive?" "Yes. I called him this morning. He's catching the first flight to Chicago. He arrives tonight." The hours that followed passed in a blur. Emily could barely focus, thousands of questions racing through her mind. Had her father really believed Victoria's kidnapping story? Why had he stopped looking for her? Would he recognize her? Would she recognize him? Mark remained by her side, a constant and reassuring presence. "Everything will be okay," he gently repeated. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." At 9:43 p.m., the flight from Seattle landed. At 10:30 p.m., a knock on the hotel room door made Emily's heart leap. Mark squeezed her shoulder in silent support before opening the door. And there he was, David Campbell. Older than in Emily's hazy memories, gray hair at his temples, worry lines marking his face. But his eyes, the same blue eyes Emily saw in the mirror every day. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Dad," she responded, the word sounding strange after so long. For a moment, neither moved. 10 years of separation, of unanswered questions, of grief and loss, had created a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. And then, without words, David Campbell opened his arms, and Emily, the girl who was abandoned, who grew up among the Amish, who nearly succumbed to revenge, who found redemption, stepped forward, allowing herself to be embraced by the father she thought she had lost forever. "I thought I'd lost you." David sobbed against her hair. "I searched for so long." "Victoria said you were dead," Emily replied, tears flowing freely down her face. "She left me in the forest to die." David pulled back, horror on his face. What? Victoria said you were kidnapped from a park. I hired private detectives, offered rewards. After 2 years without leads, investigators told me the chances of finding a missing child after so much time were almost zero. I would never have stopped looking if I'd known. The complete truth finally came to light. Not just for Emily, but for everyone. Victoria had destroyed not one, but 2 lives with her lies. That night, as father and daughter began, rebuilding the bridge between their separate worlds, Mark watched with a bittersweet smile. He had grown attached to Emily during these months, almost coming to see her as the daughter he never had. But seeing her reunited with her real father brought a joy that surpassed any personal sadness. "Thank you for taking care of her," David said to Mark when Emily finally fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. "For bringing her back to me." Mark nodded. "She's an extraordinary young woman. You have a lot of time to catch up." "And you?" David asked, noticing the affectionate look Mark cast toward Emily's closed bedroom door. "She spoke a lot about you. It seems she found a second father on your farm." Mark smiled softly. "My home will always be open to her. To both of you, actually. Seattle is too far for frequent visits." The 2 men, connected by their love for Emily, shook hands, a silent pact to put her well-being above all else. 3 days after reuniting with her father, Emily sat in the waiting room of the Chicago Police Department, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Mark was on her left, her father on her right, 2 pillars of strength between which she found courage. "Are you sure you want to do this?" David asked, concern evident on his face. "Nobody would judge you if you decided to leave the past behind. Move on." Emily shook her head, determined. "I'm not doing this just for me, Dad. What if Victoria does something similar to another child? I can't allow that possibility to exist." Detective Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with understanding eyes, approached them. "Victoria Campbell has arrived with her lawyer. She's in interrogation room 3 as requested." Emily felt her heart race. 10 years of memories, nightmares, and unanswered questions converged on this moment. Victoria's face, those cold eyes, that fake smile, still haunted her dreams occasionally. "Do you want me to go in with you?" Mark asked, his voice gentle. "No," Emily replied, straightening her shoulders. "I need to do this alone." Her father squeezed her hand. "We'll be right here waiting." With firm steps, Emily followed the detective. Down the hallway. Each step was like traversing years of her life. The frightened 3-year-old girl, the Amish child learning to trust again, the wounded teenager planning revenge, and finally, the young woman seeking justice, not retribution. When the interrogation room door opened, Emily saw Victoria for the first time in 10 years. The woman was older, of course. Some wrinkles marked her once flawless face, and gray strands mingled with her brown hair. But the calculating expression in her eyes hadn't changed. For a moment, Victoria didn't recognize her. How could she? The last time she had seen Emily, she was just a small, frightened child. Now, a strong and determined teenager stood before her. "Victoria Campbell," said Detective Rodriguez. "This is Emily Campbell. I believe you 2 know each other." Victoria's face paled, her lips parting in shock. This is impossible," she whispered. "Emily disappeared years ago. She was kidnapped." "No, Victoria," Emily replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I wasn't kidnapped. I was abandoned. By you. In the forest, for the wolves, remember?" Victoria's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with an arrogant expression, immediately intervened. "My client won't respond to unfounded accusations. If this is some kind of extortion..." "I'm not here for money," Emily interrupted, not taking her eyes off. "Victoria, I'm here for justice." and to make sure you can never do to another child what you did to me." Victoria seemed disconcerted, her gaze alternating between Emily and her lawyer. "This is ridiculous. I have no idea what this girl is talking about. My stepdaughter was kidnapped from a park 10 years ago. There are police records based on your testimony," the detective pointed out. "But now we have evidence suggesting a different story. An elderly man named Walter Peterson witnessed you abandoning Emily in the forest. We have records from the Amish community that took her in, and we have Emily herself." The lawyer leaned in to whisper something in Victoria's ear, but she pushed him away abruptly. "This is absurd. Do you know what I went through? The searches, the posters, the interviews with the police. I loved that child as if she were my own." Something inside Emily broke upon hearing that blatant lie. But instead of anger, what she felt was pity. Victoria was so trapped in her own web of lies that perhaps she really believed them now. "You told me my father was dead," Emily said calmly. "You said the wolves would be happy to find me, that I was ruining your life." Victoria paled even more. "Those were jokes, things all parents say when they're frustrated. I never meant literally. You took me to the forest, left me alone, and said that would be my new home," Emily continued, refusing to be interrupted. "I was 3 years old, Victoria. 3. Victoria's lawyer raised his hand. "Detective, this is clearly a setup. There's no way to prove what happened 10 years ago based solely on the word of a teenager and an elderly man who probably doesn't even remember what he had for breakfast." Emily smiled slightly, surprising everyone. "Actually, there is a way to prove it." She turned to the detective. "I can show you where it happened. I can take you to the exact spot where I was abandoned." "Impossible," Victoria whispered. But there was uncertainty in her eyes now. "I remember the dirt road, the trees, the clearing where you parked the car," Emily continued. "I remember every detail of that day, Victoria. The color of the sky, the sound of the birds, the last words you said to me." The atmosphere in the room changed. The lawyer looked uncomfortable now, realizing his client might actually be guilty. Victoria stared at her own hands, her veneer of confidence beginning to crack. "Why are you doing this?" Victoria finally asked, her voice almost inaudible. "I'm not doing this to get revenge or to punish you," Emily replied with a calmness that surprised even herself. "I'm doing this because no child should go through what I went through. No child should grow up believing they were abandoned because they weren't loved enough." Victoria looked up, and for an instant, a brief moment that Emily almost missed, something resembling remorse crossed her face. "And if I say I'm sorry?" Victoria asked, her voice suddenly small. "And I'm sorry doesn't undo 10 years. Victoria, it doesn't erase what you did." Emily took a deep breath. "But it would be a start toward taking responsibility for your actions." Victoria's lawyer looked alarmed. "My client is not admitting guilt to any crime. This is clearly an attempt to—" "Shut up, Robert," Victoria interrupted, surprising everyone in the room. For a long moment, she stared at Emily. Then slowly, her defenses began to crumble. "It was just supposed to be a lesson," she said, the words coming out as if they were being torn from her. "I was going to go back for her after a few hours, to scare her, so she'd stop being so demanding. But then what?" the detective pressed when Victoria paused. "Then I realized what I had done." Victoria seemed to be reliving that day, her expression distant. "I was driving back to the city and thought, my God, what have I done? But it was too late. I panicked. I knew I'd be arrested if I told the truth, so I made up the kidnapping story." The confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Emily discovered her hands were trembling, not from fear or anger, but from a strange feeling of relief. After all, these years, she finally had the truth. "As for David, your father," Victoria continued, I told him you had disappeared while playing in the park. He never doubted me. Why would he? What kind of monster abandons a child in the forest? What kind, indeed, muttered the detective, his contempt evident. Victoria rubbed her eyes, suddenly looking much older. I had problems, depression, financial difficulties. David was always traveling, and I resented him for leaving me with a child who wasn't even mine. But that's no excuse. I know it's no excuse. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of the confession. When she opened them again, she saw not a monster before her, but a broken woman, consumed by her own wrong choices. Thank you for finally telling the truth, Emily said simply. It's all I needed to hear. She stood to leave, but Victoria called her name. Emily, wait. There's something else you should know. Emily stopped, turning to face her. Your bear, said Victoria. The one your biological mother gave you. I kept it. After I left you, I couldn't get rid of it. It's in a box in my closet. All this time. An unexpected emotion tightened Emily's throat. Her bear, the last, linked to her biological mother, the companion who had comforted her on lonely nights, wasn't lost forever as she had thought. I'd like to have it back, was all she could say. When Emily left the interrogation room, Mark and her father were anxiously waiting in the hallway. Their faces lit up, seeing her walk out with her head held high, not as a victim, but as a survivor. How did it go? David asked, wrapping her in a protective hug. She confessed, Emily replied. Everything. Mark smiled, pride evident in his eyes. You have incredible strength, Emily. More than many adults I know. That afternoon, as police officers took Victoria for formal booking and additional questioning, Emily's lawyer, hired by Mark, explained the legal ramifications. Victoria will be charged with criminal abandonment, perjury, and possibly attempted homicide, depending on how the prosecutor interprets the evidence, Robert Simmons explained. With her confession, she'll hardly escape a prison sentence. And then? Emily asked. What happens after she serves her time? Simmons seemed surprised by the question. Well, she'll be free to rebuild her life, although with a permanent criminal record. Emily nodded slowly. I hope she can. I don't want the cycle of pain to continue. David and Mark exchanged looks of admiration. Emily had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but transformed, capable of compassion even for the one who had deeply hurt her. 2 days later, after a supervised search of Victoria's house, the teddy bear returned to Emily's arms, worn, with one eye missing and fur threadbare, but to Emily it was a treasure beyond any value, a tangible piece of her biological mother, whom she barely remembered beyond a soft perfume and a lullaby. Hello, old friend, she whispered, hugging the bear to her chest. We've missed each other a lot, haven't we? The Chicago courthouse was an imposing building of stone and glass, its wide staircases leading to heavy doors that seemed to separate the common world from the realm of judgment and law. Emily climbed the steps slowly, each step deliberate, aware of the historical weight of this moment. 4 months had passed since the confrontation with Victoria in the interrogation room. 4 months of testimonies, meetings with prosecutors, preparations for the trial. 4 months in which Emily had divided her time between her father's home in Seattle and Mark's farm, building bridges between her past and her future. Her father, David, walked beside her, his support silent but unwavering. Mark followed just behind, along with John and Sarah King, who had made the rare journey outside the Amish community, especially to be present on this crucial day. Walter, now using a cane but still strong in spirit, completed the group that Emily affectionately called my real family. Inside the courtroom, Victoria was already seated next to her lawyer. She looked different, not just older or more tired, but fundamentally transformed. The arrogance and coldness that Emily remembered had given way to something that seemed like genuine remorse. The trial was surprisingly brief. With Victoria's confession, Walter's testimony, the Amish family's records, and Emily's own moving narrative, the jury took only 2 hours to deliberate. In the case of State versus Victoria Campbell, for criminal abandonment of a dependent and perjury, this jury finds the defendant guilty on all charges. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Emily closed her eyes, a strange mixture of emotions taking hold of her. Not joy or triumph, as she had imagined in her darkest days of revenge plans, but a kind of quiet peace, like the silence that follows a storm. Judge Hernandez, a stern woman with keen eyes, looked directly at Victoria. "Stand to receive your sentence, Mrs. Campbell." Victoria rose slowly, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. "The crimes you committed against a defenseless child in your care are of a nature this court rarely encounters," declared the judge, her firm voice echoing through the silent room. "You not only abandoned a 3-year-old child in a life-threatening situation, but also perpetuated an elaborate lie that caused additional suffering to the child's father and wasted valuable resources that could have been used to find genuinely kidnapped children." Victoria kept her head down, accepting each word as deserved. "This court sentences you to 8 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 5 years, on condition of mandatory psychological treatment and community service in child welfare programs." The gavel struck, sealing Victoria's fate. As officers approached to escort her, she turned to look directly at Emily. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "It's not enough, I know, but it's true." Emily nodded once, accepting the apology for what it was, not absolution, but an acknowledgement. A hesitant first step toward something that perhaps, one day, might resemble forgiveness. Outside the courthouse, under the clear autumn sky, Emily's improvised family gathered. David, her biological father, now a literature professor in Seattle, was planning a sabbatical to spend more time getting to know the daughter he had lost for so long. Mark had become almost a second father, his farm a second home. The Kings would continue to be the family that had saved her when she was most vulnerable. "What happens now?" asked Hannah, now a young woman, but still with the same gentle smile that had comforted a frightened 3-year-old Emily. Emily looked toward the city skyline, so different from the open plains of the Amish community or the rolling fields of Mark's farm. "Now I live," she answered simply. "Not as a victim, not as a survivor, just as Emily." When David suggested she move permanently to Seattle to finish her studies, Emily was torn. On one hand, she longed to get to know better the father she had lost. On the other, she felt a deep connection with Mark and his farm, the place where she had truly begun to heal. It was Mark who offered the solution. "What if I moved closer to Seattle?" he suggested during a dinner with Emily and David. "I've always thought about starting over in a new place. Washington has great land for farming." Emily's eyes lit up. "You would do that? Leave your farm?" Mark smiled gently. "Emily, in the last few months you've taught me that home isn't a place. It's where the people we love are. My farm is just land and wood. What matters is here." He touched his own heart. 3 months later, Emily moved to her father's house on the outskirts of Seattle. Mark bought a small property just 30 minutes away, turning it into a smaller but equally welcoming version of his old farm. And so, finally, Emily found balance, dividing her time between her father's urban home, where she discovered the pleasure of books and formal education she never had, and Mark's farm, where she kept alive the practical skills learned from the Amish. Twice a year, they traveled to visit the King family, bringing gifts and stories from the English world, as the Amish called the outside world. And once a year, on the anniversary of the day Walter and Ranger found her in the forest, Emily visited the elderly man in his small house on the outskirts of the forest that had almost been her end. On her 15th birthday, Emily received an unexpected letter, from the prison where Victoria was serving her sentence. For a long time, the letter remained on Emily's bedside table, unopened. "You don't have to open it if you don't want to," her father assured her. "Or you can burn it," suggested Mark, worried it might reopen healed wounds. But Emily knew she needed to read it. To truly close this chapter of her life, she needed to face Victoria's words one last time. The letter was surprisingly brief. "Emily, there are no words that can undo what I did. There is no explanation that can justify my actions. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't have that right. I just want you to know that each day here I remember what I did, and I try to understand how I could become someone capable of such cruelty. I'm working with traumatized children in the prison program, trying somehow to give back to the world a little of what I took from it. I hope you have found peace. I hope you have found love. Most of all, I hope you don't carry the weight of hatred for me, not because I deserve that mercy, but because you deserve that freedom. Victoria." Emily carefully folded the letter and stored it in a box along with her old teddy bear, not as a treasure, but as a reminder. A reminder that darkness can exist in any heart, but also that it's possible to emerge from the worst storm and still find light. On clear summer nights, Emily sometimes sat on the porch of Mark's farm, looking at the stars. It wasn't so different from the Amish community. The same sky, the same constellations, the same peaceful silence. "What are you thinking about?" asked Mark, joining her with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Emily smiled, accepting the drink. "I'm thinking about the paths life takes. How something as terrible as being abandoned in the forest ended up bringing me to people like you, like the Kings, like Walter." "You transformed your pain into strength," Mark observed. "Not everyone can do that." Emily nodded, thoughtful. "I think I understood what Sarah King always said, that recognizing darkness in others isn't to fear it, but to appreciate the light, even more when we find it." On Emily's 16th birthday, a special surprise awaited her. David and Mark had secretly planned for months, and now revealed their gift: legal adoption papers. "I know you're almost an adult," said Mark, emotional, "but I wanted to make official what we've felt for a long time. If you'll accept, I'd like to legally adopt you. Not to replace your father," he quickly added, "but to officially add one more member to your family." David smiled, supporting the idea. "You have enough room in your heart for 2 fathers. Don't." "You?" With tears in her eyes, Emily hugged the 2 men who had filled different parts of the void left by years of abandonment. "Family isn't defined by blood," she said, repeating the wisdom learned from the Amish. "It's defined by love." And so, surrounded by the love of her multiple families, her biological father, her adoptive father, the Amish family who raised her, and even the memory of her biological mother preserved in the old teddy bear, Emily finally completed her journey. It wasn't the end, of course. It was just the beginning of a new phase. A life built not on the trauma of the past, but on the promise of the future. A life where she wasn't defined by the abandonment she had survived, but by the connections she had built. On a quiet night, Emily wrote a final entry in her diary. "The stepmother said I was ruining her life, and that the wolves would be happy to find me. She didn't know that by abandoning me in the forest, she wasn't condemning me, she was freeing me. Freeing me to find people who would love me not despite my scars, but with them. People who would teach me that the opposite of abandonment isn't just being found, but finding yourself." Closing her diary, Emily looked out the window at the starry sky, grateful not just for having survived, but for having finally learned to live, fully, truly, without fear of the wolves that had once threatened her.